This video is an experiment. What I want to do is to go through the index, so the content of this book, the BraiTrix trap, for the first time without preparation after I have written it. So that is now 16 years ago. I've been passively involved in philosophic studies, but having created a family, a career, and so on, I actually did that only part-time and without really digging into kind of trying to get my head around specific things. I accepted a lot of things like we humans usually do. I say, yeah, that's fine. I haven't defined it perfectly, but so that is kind of my story. So that for the past, I would say 16 years, I did not do anything in really seriously. Now, to write this book has taken 1,000 hours, a little bit more, a little bit less, I don't know, plus 20 years of research. I had collected 1,400, let's say, arguments, and then I grouped them together into what you can see here, 16 or so chapters. I think initially it was like 14, and then I added some especially at the end, I added 2 or 3 chapters. Okay, so chapter 2, preparation. I actually wanted to create a book that is a little bit different. So that is why I've added reading instructions, and the main thing is that every chapter and every statement this book does throughout the 200 pages allows you to put in your percentage number, what you think this statement, it's usually a page or 2 pages long, how realistic that is, how much truth you attach to that. And I put my own truth to that. So how well researched is that, and how big a chance is there that there may be surprises and it in the end is differently. A letter to a friend is for me very, very, very important, and this is actually the motivation from the limbic system that actually motivates me to look for, with my intellect, and to kind of create a meaning for the world, transcendental. So that is like the chain. I like friends, and therefore I think about it every day, and I want to create something that is more than myself. That is also kind of the motivation. And there were at least like a much greater part of 100, I would even say maybe 1,000 conversations I had. And from these 1,000 conversations, I collected these arguments on little sticky notes, on audio recording, on emails, whatever. I collected all that stuff. Then I found actually one word I had to define, and that is how nature invents something, because invention and nature does not go along in the way humans think that these two things go along. Now, what you will know after having read the book, what I try to do, I try to put up the circle of interesting questions humans have throughout their life. Who are we? Where's the universe? What are my friends? Why do I work like that? What is Darwinism? And so on. So lots of these things. And what I want is actually to create a system, just a system of there's no details. You know, there's not a lot of details. There could be so many details around that. Each professor could kind of like a T-shaped knowledge. What if you look at a T-shaped knowledge? What I do in this book is the upper mark, the upper line of the T. That is what I do. But if that upper line of the T creates a model in your head, and this model answers almost every question in a reasonable way, normally it answers the question, but then you have more questions. You say, oh, well, there was an exception. Why is that exception? But the basic rule is there. So the granularity is exactly this upper line of the T-shaped knowledge. Now, so the chapters, I mentioned 14 of them. Now, the first is nature. And nature is very important because it actually is, where we come from. And that is why it's very important to understand Darwinism, the concept of Darwinism, the speed of Darwinism, which is very, very important for the artificial intelligence threat or challenge or, opportunity. Some conclusions from Darwinism, and then Darwinism in action, like partnership, then male, female, the mating game, dating, and so on. And this is kind of like the personal thing which we all have, and then the implication of Darwinism on our lives. And then this new word is, I think I remember it's natinf. So it's not nature invents. So it's not inventing, because invention, like there's Richard Dawkins, The Blind Clockmaker, I think it is called, the book, where when nature invents something, it's a try and error thing, error back. And so we think, if we think about invention, we always think there's a aim. I go for this goal. That's my objective. But nature doesn't have an objective, and that is exactly the subchapter 3.8, difficulties with Darwinism. So, and then now we have where we live, and how we evolved, how we became who we were. And one big part of us is our brain. And the brain just happens to be our thinking engine. We are not artificial intelligence. There's a nice experiment where you have a starship, flying through the space. And on the starship, there's an artificial intelligence computer with sensors. And he kind of has spent some time, let's say 100 years, near the Earth, and observes what the nature does on the Earth. So with what does he come up? Because he doesn't have an ego, he doesn't have a limbic system. Maybe not. Maybe, as in human brains, the limbic system is actually the key to our internal drive to do something. So our intellect wouldn't work without the urge of the limbic system to do something. So what I'm going to do in the 4th chapter is to talk about our computer, which we have in our head. So I explain a little bit the neural networks and the sensors and the connections and how a brain functions, how we train our brain, and what was the use of our brain in the beginning, and the driving force for humans. So how we improved our brain, how nature improved our brain, and so on. And the driving force, which for humans is kind of this limbic system. Then how do we think? So how is the thinking process? How is the learning process? How does a neural network work? And there's an example, how somebody gets better making coffee, and how the neural network works is then very funny, because I'm actually a great fan of Italian espresso, and I prepare 2 to 3 espressos every day with a handmade, by hand I press the water through the espresso. Fantastic. And then the rubber band strategy I like a lot, which is this thing: if your brain, if you have a goal, then every thought of your brain is kind of pulled with a small rubber band into that direction, and you can't help to go to that goal. And then also, how clever is the brain? So what is our brain capable of doing? And then like switching on the turbo in our brains, which means I want to switch on rational thinking, unbiased thinking, accepting what is that is, and then also have a model that fits. Because if you always fight, every you know, every encounter you have with nature, with others, is is a kind of, again, a surprise. Oh, why did that behave like that? Why doesn't that work like I thought? That is actually very unsane, and is such a slowing down force of our progress. And then I defined the reality quotient. So that means how well a brain is in terms of understanding reality. And I think I can watch somebody for a minute and tell about, like, from 0 to 100 with maybe 10% accuracy, how much he is a critical thinker, an unbiased thinker, and how much he's just an emotional thinker that even follows his reptile brain, reptile and limbic system, and uses the intellect only for, I don't know, counting how much he has to pay in the supermarket. Then complexity of problems, and that is the thing. We always think that, like, everyday problems are not complex. They are every problem is terribly complex, but we just cut it short. And I say, do you want a coffee? Well, no, yes, it's late, it's not late, I'm not thirsty, is it healthy for me? And, you know, so every question is terribly complex, but we cut it short. And that is exactly the thing with this very, very easy, simplistic model of the world in 200 pages, yeah? And that is exactly what we do every day, that we cut down on complexity of problems. Then the limits of the human brain. I think there are very few limits, and as Jordan Peterson says, I like that a lot, where he says, now do for 10 to 20 years, really every day, do something for your brain, do something for your education, and you'll be surprised how much you know. And even, I would even go here, even if you start as the dumbest person, I don't know, IQ 80, and you really want to go for it, I think you can achieve fantastic results. You can achieve things, even your IQ will go up, but you will have an experience, you will be open, you will have friends, you will understand, because you know, the thing is, you just need to understand systems. You don't have to calculate calculus and so on. So the thing is, that is 10 to 20 years hard work, but that means you need to have a goal, meaning, and so on. Then different types of brains, supranational brains, natural brains, that I think that is artificial intelligence, and natural brains, and differences between the two types of brains. So that is kind of a little bit this hobby of mine, which is like neural networks, which I did at university. Aging myself here, maybe where I programmed neural networks before the invention of the signum function. Was terrible. I couldn't make my Apple II recognize images, although I tried to kind of design a neural network with 4 layers, 3 layers, 7 layers, and so on, but it didn't work. It simply did not work, and so I gave up. That was 35 years ago, I think. Then education and predisposition. So rebuilding the human brain, some examples, giving estimates, that's a fantastic thing, like rule of thumb, and then differences between languages. That comes from the fact that I learned German, and then I added English in the US 6 months, and then I added French, and then I moved to Italian, lost my French, then majored Italian after 2 years, then my French came back, then I in vain tried Russian, then I tried Polish, and it took me 15 years to come up with a D, you know, so I kind of can order pizza, which in Poland you wouldn't order, you would order barsh or something like that. And then I tried in vain Chinese, and also here, kind of in these languages, I gave up. Now, but here, one of the things I discovered here, you just need to find the right system, and that is how I came to this D level in Polish. So it is possible to actually go beyond, beyond what you believe. And this is exactly this thing Jordan Peterson says, just give it a go, and 10 years plus systematic thinking about it. Ooh, now it gets long, so we are at the truth. Yeah, the chapter about truth, and this is one of the central chapters I always have in my brain, the concept of truth, the absolute truth. Is there absolute truth? And that is why in the book I write down these 90%, 99% numbers behind the statements. And then please add yours, and then you can understand how well do I think I know things. And this is very important to build your system of the world. Because if this oversimplified system is already wrong, or you don't know how wrong it is, then it's terrible. It won't help you a lot. Here, what I like a lot, several chapters here, are we prepared to find the truth? Is our brain designed for that? That's actually the subtitle of this book. And the history of truth. I have to say the old Greeks, I think also the Egyptians, had quite some things, then the Romans maybe, then some philosophers, and then we had the dark Middle Age, let's say at least in Europe, where the religion actually then forbid, they killed people if they had other beliefs and so on. So it's terrible, the history of truth is actually not a nice thing. Then all these things, question of existence, then all possible systems, I think is if we try to understand our system we live in, so like Stephen Hawking tried to understand, or Goethe or whoever, what is holding the world together? How does our world work? And now, am I able within this world to think about this world? So that means, can I virtually raise myself above this system and look down on it? In neurolinguistic programming, it would be position 3. That is a big question. No? Now, the database of human knowledge, and that is one of the projects I would have loved to start 16 years ago when I wrote the book, is like to make up a database of the knowledge and then put in the things and the probabilities that they are true. And then my this is the history of my development of the great unified theory of philosophy. And I tried really hard for many, many years to come up with some approach to the great unified theory of philosophy. And then proof for the non-existence of supernatural forces, which I believe do not exist. Evidence clashes with reality. So things when you find out something new, and then what is true and what is truth and what is true. Like, are statements true? Does that make sense to say like the sun is shining? Well, yes, but what does that mean? At what level? Yeah, for humans, yes, but for maybe for an artificial intelligence, it's different, and so on. And then what is rational thinking? Which I believe is just this intellect, and not the limbic system and not the reptile brain. And then destroying the brain's logical thinking and curing the brain's logical thinking. What actions in our life destroy or cure it? So this book hopefully cures the brain's capability to logical thinking, and our interaction with the real world actually destroys the brain's logical thinking if it actually wants to. Then being critical, is that good? Is that not good? Handling probabilities, that is exactly this. I want to know how probable something I think is. And then the prerequisites, that's what IQ you need. And then, do we want truth? You know, the wishful thinker and the realistic thinker. This is like, what is your goal? Are you a wisdom seeker? Then your goal is wisdom. Or if you are a wishful thinker, then you have wishes. Your limbic system says, this is my wish. And then everything goes according to this wish. And approaching the truth, universal truth. So that's a kind of staged model. So from how you move on to then go to universal truth, then the introduction of the completeness of the great unified theory of philosophy, and then patterns of philosophical discussions, which I've seen reading many books and doing many pseudo-philosophical discussions with friends and colleagues, or with even unknown people. Then philosophy and physics. And they should be very, very, very closely related. So how it all began, the creation of the universe in one page, applying the most likely will happen rule. I like this rule a lot, and this is, I think this is now common, that in every system where things can move, you know, according to the behavior of this thing, the outcome is better for this thing or is worse. Better means it multiplies. So if it's better for this thing, then this thing gets bigger or creates another thing that's similar. And that is exactly this system which the most likely thing will happen. So if the condition is that things can change based on an intellectual reaction, but that is reptile brain, that is pre-reptile brain. So it's just, I do something, this little bacteria, this little ribonucleic acid is doing something different if, for example, the light is on or the light is not on, the sun is on, the sun is shining, and so this is for me